Claude responded. My accountant called me on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:12, which I remember precisely because I was standing in the garage, sanding down an old porch rail, and had, my accountant called me on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:12, which I remember precisely because I was standing in the garage, sanding down an old porch rail, and had to wipe my hands twice before I trusted them on the phone. Not his assistant, not the automated appointment confirmation that buzzes my phone every quarter like clockwork. Harold Bennick himself, calling from a number I'd saved 14 years ago and never once had reason to call back, because in 14 years of doing my taxes, Harold Bennick had never once phoned me without an appointment already on the books. I picked up on the first ring. He said, "Walter, it's Harold. I need you to come by the office this afternoon if you can." I said, "What's this about?" He said, "I'd rather show you than tell you over the phone. Can you be here by 4:30? There was a register in his voice I clocked immediately. The way you clock a change in weather before you can name it. Not panic. Harold was not a man who panicked. He'd built a two-man accounting practice into a firm with 11 employees over 3 decades in Tulsa by being the single most unshakable person in any room he occupied. What I heard instead was the tone of a man who has found something he cannot yet explain and is being very careful about how he hands it to you. I said I'd be there. I set down the sandpaper. Who? I let the dog in from the yard, an old beagle mix named Curtis, that my late wife Rosemary had picked out of a shelter litter 8 years back because she said he had an honest face, and Curtis had spent every day since proving her right by refusing to bark at anything except the mail truck. I put on a clean shirt. I drove the 11 minutes to Harold's office on Cherry Street. He met me in the reception area himself instead of sending his assistant, which was the second thing that told me something was wrong before a single word explained it. He walked me back to his office, closed the door, and instead of sitting behind his desk the way he always did, he sat in the chair beside mine, which put us shoulder to shoulder facing the same direction, like two men about to look at bad news together rather than one man delivering it to another. He slid a stack of papers across the low table in front of us. He said, "Walter, 3 days ago I got a call from a title company in Broken Arrow, asking me to confirm your signature on a home equity loan application." I told them I hadn't prepared any such application, and they sent me a copy of what they had on file. I looked at the stack. He said, "Walter, someone applied for $180,000 against your house on Birch Lane. The application lists your income, your assets, a debt schedule I never prepared, and a signature at the bottom of 6 different pages that is not yours, and it is not mine, too, but it is trying very hard to look like both." I opened the folder myself this time. The first page was a loan application with my name, my social security number, the address of the house Rosemary and I bought in 1994, correct down to the zip code. The stated purpose of the loan was home renovation and medical expense consolidation. My monthly income was listed at a figure I hadn't earned since I retired from the rail yard 9 years back. Attached was a letter, on stationery designed to look like it came from Harold's firm, stating that Harold Bennick, CPA, had reviewed and verified my financial statements for the purposes of the loan. I turned the page. There was a second document, a durable power of attorney, dated 6 weeks earlier, naming my son-in-law, Dale Ferris, as my attorney in fact for all financial matters, in the event of the principal's incapacity or unavailability. At the bottom of that page was another signature that resembled mine, closely enough to survive a glance, and beneath it, a notary stamp from a notary public whose name I did not recognize and who, it would later turn out, did not exist. I looked up from the folder. 8181. Harold was watching me the way a man watches someone absorb bad news, with the specific patience of someone who has delivered hard things before and knows the correct response to silence is to let it sit there. I said, "Harold, I have never signed a power of attorney in my life. Rosemary and I did our estate planning in 2019, and there is no such document in it." He said, "I know." "Walter, I pulled the file before you got here," I said. "This loan application, home renovation. I haven't renovated a single room in that house since we redid the kitchen in 2015. He said, "I know that too." I said, "Who submitted this to the title company?" Harold reached for a separate sheet clipped to the back of the folder. He said the loan broker's records showed the application had been submitted electronically by a Dale Ferris, listed as the borrower's authorized representative under power of attorney. Dale, I set the folder down on the table with the particular carefulness of a man deciding, in real time, not to crush the thing in his hands. I looked out Harold's window at Cherry Street, ordinary Tuesday traffic moving past with no idea what was sitting on the table 6 feet away from it. Harold said, "Walter, I've already called the title company and told them the CPA letter is fraudulent and that I never prepared or reviewed any such documents. I'm filing a formal notice with them today. I also called a friend of mine who handles fraud cases for the county, and I want you to hear this from me before you hear it from anyone else. Whoever did this used my name and my license to do it, and I am not going to sit here quietly while that stands." He picked up his own phone, right in front of me, and dialed. He said into it, "Denise, pull the complete file for Walter Adkins, every return back to 2012, and get me a certified letter template for fraud notification. I need it by end of day." He hung up and looked at me. He said, "What do you need from me, Walter?" I said, "Everything you just started. And one more thing." He said, "Name it." I said, "Don't back down from this." He said, "Walter." He said, "Ha, ha, 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 ha. I have never backed down from anything in 31 years of doing this work. Today's not going to be the first time. I picked up the folder, thanked him, and walked out through the reception area into a Cherry Street afternoon that had gone strange and thin around the edges, the way the world does right after something in it is cracked. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute with the folder under my arm. Dale had filed paperwork to take out $180,000 against my house. He had forged a power of attorney to make it look legal. He had done all of it while showing up at my place every other Sunday to help me change the furnace filter and ask how my hip was holding up since the surgery. I did not feel rage standing there, and I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. What I felt was something closer to what I used to feel 40 feet up on a signal tower with a storm rolling in from the west, that particular flat. Clear calm that comes from having spent a career learning exactly how bad things go wrong and exactly what it takes to stop them before they do. I had spent 36 years as a signal maintainer for the railroad, the man responsible for making sure that when a train came through a crossing at 60 miles an hour in the dark, every light and gate and circuit did exactly what it was supposed to do, because the cost of a single failure wasn't measured in dollars. I knew how to read a system for the point where it was about to fail, and I was looking at one now. My name is Walter Adkins. I am 67 years old. I live on Birch Lane in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the house my wife and I raised 2 children in, and the man who filed that paperwork against me had made exactly one mistake he could not walk back. He had spent 2 years treating me like a man who was slowing down and wouldn't notice. What he was actually standing in front of was 36 years of a man whose entire profession was making sure nothing failed without someone catching it first. He had no idea, and he had 5 weeks before the loan was set to close, and he found out. I want to back up, because to understand how a man ends up staring at a forged power of attorney with his son-in-law's name behind it, you have to understand what came before. I started at the rail yard in 1979, at 20 years old, climbing signal towers in Oklahoma heat that could take the paint off a truck, and I retired in 2017 as the senior signal maintenance supervisor for the whole Western Division. It is not glamorous work, and nobody outside the industry understands what it involves, but I will tell you this. It teaches you to trust nothing you haven't verified with your own hands. Twice, and it teaches you to write everything down, because a verbal report 30 years ago about a faulty crossing gate is worth exactly nothing when a train derails and the lawyers show up asking who signed off on what. I kept logs my whole career the way some men keep a Bible on the nightstand, out of habit that turned into faith. That habit did not retire when I did. Rosemary and I bought the house on Birch Lane in 1994. A modest 3-bedroom brick ranch in a neighborhood where the trees had grown tall enough by now to meet over the street in summer. Rosemary Jean Adkins. Born Rosemary Jean Halloway in Muskogee in 1955. Taught 4th grade for 29 years at the elementary school, 4 blocks from our house. And she was the kind of teacher who remembered every student's birthday for years after they left her classroom. Tells where she kept a little spiral notebook in the kitchen drawer where she wrote down things worth remembering. A funny thing one of our grandkids said, a recipe she wanted to try, a line from a book, and every now and then something I'd said that she didn't want to lose. I found that notebook after she passed. I have read it more times than I'll admit to anybody. Rosemary was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of 2020 and died that November in the bedroom we'd shared for 36 years, with both our kids there. I won't dwell on that. What I'll tell you is the house has been different since, and I have handled that difference the same way I handled a system with a component missing, by accounting for it and reinforcing where the reinforcement is needed. We had 2 children. Our son Mark is 42, lives out in Denver where he works as a mechanical engineer, calls every Sunday without fail, and flew back to Tulsa 3 times the first year after Rosemary died without me having to ask. He has his mother's habit of noticing things and my habit of writing them down, and between the two, he is exactly the man I want on the phone when something goes wrong. Our daughter Carrie is 39, lives 20 minutes away in Broken Arrow, with her husband Dale and their son, Tyler. Carrie has her mother's warmth, but she found herself, somewhere in her early 30s, married to a man whose gravity slowly bent her orbit in a direction I watched happen and did not move fast enough to stop. I want to be careful here, because she is not a bad person. She is a person who married someone whose influence, over the years, recalibrated her in small increments. She likely never fully registered. Dale Ferris was 41 years old, worked as a loan officer at a regional bank branch in Broken Arrow, had an easy laugh, a good handshake, and the specific social gift of a man who had practiced charm long enough that it no longer cost him anything to deploy it. He remembered which grandkid liked which candy. He asked about my hip every time he saw me and actually seemed to listen to the answer. I had clocked, inside the first year of knowing him, that Dale was a man who ran the numbers on every relationship he was in, not maliciously exactly, just structurally, the way some men can't help counting cards even at a friendly table. Rosemary had clocked it faster than I did. Driving home from the first Thanksgiving Carrie brought him to, back in 2013, she'd said, "Walter, that man is always calculating something." I told her I knew what she meant. She said she knew I did. The early years were unremarkable on the surface. Dale and Carrie bought a house in Broken Arrow in 2015. Tyler was born in 2017. They came to Birch Lane for every holiday, and Dale was reliably warm, reliably attentive, the kind of son-in-law that made people at church tell me how lucky I was. What I logged without acting on started around 2021. Questions about whether I'd looked into refinancing the house given how low rates had gotten. Comments about whether Rosemary's and my estate paperwork was up to date. An offer, framed as a favor, to take a look at my retirement accounts since he worked in finance and it'd be no trouble. The pattern of a man who had decided that proximity to something valuable was a form of pre-ownership. Rosemary saw it too, before she got sick. She told me once, sitting up in bed with her notebook in the fall of 2019, "Walter, make sure everything is written down somewhere. And make sure it isn't only you who knows where." I didn't fully register the urgency in that sentence at the time. I understood it a lot better later. After Rosemary died, Dale's approach shifted the way a strategy shifts when a constraint gets removed. The estate questions got more specific. The offers to help manage things got more frequent. In the fall of 2022, he asked, gently, whether I'd thought about setting up a power of attorney, just in case, given that I was living alone now and wasn't getting any younger. I was walking 2.5 miles most mornings around the neighborhood with Curtis on the leash. My doctor had told me at my last physical that my numbers looked better than men 15 years younger than me. I understood, in the moment Dale asked that question, that it wasn't concern talking. What I hadn't understood yet was how far he'd already gone with the idea. I found out how far when Harold called me on a Tuesday at 3:12. I drove from Harold's office straight to a strip mall off 71st Street, not home, not to call Mark first, to the office of Denise Pruitt, an elder law attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, and whose name I had, 3 years earlier, filed away almost as a hypothetical after asking my estate lawyer, in an offhand way, whether he knew anyone who handled fraud against older folks. He'd said, "I know exactly one person in this town who wins these, and she doesn't take appointments. You just show up." Denise Pruitt was maybe 50, built like a woman who didn't waste steps any more than she wasted words. Her office had a whiteboard with 3 case timelines going in different colors of marker. She was on a call when her assistant walked me back. She held up one finger, wrapped the call in under a minute, and said, "Sit, tell me." I sat. I put the folder on her desk. I said, "My son-in-law filed a home equity loan against my house using a power of attorney I never signed and never gave anyone. He forged my signature and used a fake CPA letter with my accountant's name on it." She looked at the folder without touching it yet. She said, "How do you know it's forged?" I said, "Because I never signed a power of attorney, and because my accountant called me 3 days after the title company contacted him, and he's already reported it and pulled my full file to prove it," she said. "And you can account for where you were and what you were doing on any dates listed in that paperwork?" I said, "I keep a calendar. I have kept one every day of my adult life. I can tell you where I was on any day in the last 5 years within about 20 minutes. She looked at me for a second. She said, "What'd you do for a living?" I said, 36 years on the railroad, signal maintenance." She said, "That explains the calendar." She pulled the folder toward her and read through it in total silence for close to 2 minutes, turning each page like she was handling something that might still be live. She closed it and said, "Mr. Adkins, if these documents are what they look like, your son-in-law has committed fraud on a lending institution, forgery, identity theft, and if we can show he knew you didn't consent, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which under Oklahoma law does not require you to actually be vulnerable, only for him to have represented that you were. Those are 4 separate felonies." I said, "I understand that." She said, "How do you want to handle it?" I said, "I want the loan stopped cold before it closes. I want the forged documents in a record that follows Dale Ferris for the rest of his professional life. And I want to be in the room the day it happens." She was quiet a moment, then said, "Those are all achievable." She picked up her pen and said, "Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out because you think it doesn't matter. Let me decide what matters." I told her everything, start to finish, 40 minutes without stopping. She wrote the entire time in handwriting. I couldn't read upside down and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Did Dale have legitimate access to any of my accounts? None. Everything had gone to Mark as successor after Rosemary passed. Did Carrie know what Dale had done? I told her I honestly didn't know, and I wanted to find out before I assumed anything either way. Did I have any record of the conversations where Dale had raised the power of attorney idea? I said, "I write down what people say to me the same day they say it. I have entries going back to 2021. Denise set her pen down. She said, "Mr. Adkins, I've handled something like 19 of these cases in this county in the last decade. I've had maybe 3 clients walk in here with what you just handed me." I said, 36 years of writing down what I see. It's not a habit anymore. It's just what I do. The first call Denise made from my presence was to the title company to formally place a hold and dispute on the loan, which stopped the closing cold in its tracks. The second was to an investigator she used named Roy Castellano, 61 years old, retired sheriff's deputy, wore the same brown jacket to every meeting, and cared more about what was true than what anybody wanted to be true. He called Denise 4 days later with what he'd found, and what he'd found wasn't opportunism, it was architecture. Dale had spent close to a year and a half researching Oklahoma power of attorney law, found a document mill online that produced convincing-looking legal templates, and built a paper trail of 4 separate conversations with Harold's firm that had never occurred. He had lifted my signature from a card I'd signed and mailed Dale and Carrie for their wedding anniversary 6 years back, a card that had sat in a box in their attic all this time. He used a wedding anniversary card to steal a dead man's trust and forge a signature to strip a living one. Roy also found that Dale had opened a business checking account under an entity called Ferris Family Asset Management LLC, registered 14 months earlier. No clients, no activity, no deposits. A clean, empty vessel sitting there waiting on money that hadn't arrived yet. Denise looked at that account a long time and said, "He built the receiving end before he built the fraud. He was that confident you'd be processed." I said, "He's known me 12 years. she said. He saw an old man living alone. He didn't see the man underneath it. I said, I, 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 do, I. He just saw what he expected to see. I have to tell you about the conversation with Carrie separately, because it's the part of this that cost me the most, and the part I've turned over the most times since. I called her on a Thursday evening, 12 days before the loan's scheduled closing date, after Denise told me it needed to happen before we went any further. Carrie answered on the second ring, her regular voice, no idea yet what was coming. I told her to just listen first. Then I told her everything. The folder, the forged power of attorney, the timeline Roy had put together, the empty LLC, sitting in Broken Arrow waiting. All of it, straight through, no stopping. When I finished, there was a long quiet on the line. Long enough I checked to see if the call had dropped. She said, Dad, I didn't know about any loan. I didn't know he'd done anything with your house. I said, what did you know? She said, he told me he'd set up some paperwork to help manage things for you, in case anything happened, since you're on your own now. He said you'd probably fight him on it at first because you're stubborn. He showed me something, but not the whole thing. He said the details were just legal boilerplate. I sat with that a second. The details were just legal boilerplate. The exact language a man uses when he needs his wife agreeable and not asking questions. I said, Carrie, are you going to stand next to what he did, or are you going to tell the truth about what you know? A long silence, the sound of somebody looking straight at something in their own life they'd been stepping around. She said, I'll tell the truth, all of it. I said, meet with Denise tomorrow. Bring anything in writing, texts, emails, anything at all. She said, I have texts, Dad. I have a lot of them. I said, I know. And Carrie, I love you. And that's not up for negotiation because of any of this. But what Dale did is a crime, and how you handle the next couple weeks is going to say a lot about what comes next. She said, quiet. I know. At the end, she said, I, I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions. I told her, ask them from here on out. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table a long while thinking about something Rosemary had said about Carrie once, in that careful way she had of naming hard things. She's got your stubbornness and his blind spots. She'll find her way out of it. Just give her the room to. I'd given her the room. She'd found it. Denise met with Carrie Friday morning and called that afternoon. 60. Some text messages over about a year. Carrie had known there was some kind of paperwork happening. She had not known it was forged, had not known the power of attorney was fake, had not known about the LLC. She'd been managed, deliberately, by her own husband. That was both the true version and the one that mattered legally. Denise also told me she'd filed a formal fraud complaint with the county district attorney's office, on top of what Harold had already reported to the state accountancy board. She asked if I was ready. I told her I'd been ready since I was standing on the sidewalk outside Harold's office with that folder under my arm. Mark flew in from Denver on a Friday red-eye without me asking him to. He called at 6 that morning to say he'd booked the flight, landed by early afternoon, and we sat at my kitchen table that night while I told him everything. He listened the way his mother used to, all the way through, no interrupting. When I finished, he looked at the table a second and said, "Are you doing okay?" I said, "I'm functional." He said, "That's not the same thing, Dad." I said, "No, it isn't. Okay comes after this is over." He said, "Mom used to say you'd take care of every piece of machinery in a 100-mile radius before you'd take care of yourself." I said. She wasn't wrong about much. We sat up talking past 11. I lay in bed that night looking at the ceiling, not scared exactly, just wide awake the particular way you get the night before. Something that matters, not from fear, but from being fully present to it. I thought about Rosemary's notebook in the kitchen drawer. I thought about 36 years of writing things down and what it means to keep a habit going long after the reason you built it is gone. Then, I slept. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning at the Tulsa County Courthouse, an unremarkable building the way courthouses always are. Beige hallways, an old fluorescent light, and decades of other people's urgent business soaked into the floor tile. Denise met me in the hallway at 8:40. Mark stood beside me. Harold showed up at 8:45 because Denise had asked him to appear in person, and he hadn't hesitated for a second. At 9, Dale arrived with his attorney, a competent-looking man named Bruce Talley, who had the expression of somebody expecting a routine morning. Dale wore a good suit, hair combed, the full composed presentation of a man who expected to walk out of that room with something he'd been building toward for 2 years. He clocked me in the hallway, and I watched his face recalibrate in about half a second before he pulled it back together. He said, "Walter, didn't expect you'd come down for this personally." I said, "It's a hearing about whether somebody committed fraud using my name, Dale." "Where else would I be?" he said. "I hope you know none of this came from a bad place." I said, "I know exactly what place it came from." His attorney touched his elbow, and they moved toward the courtroom doors. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Nolan, on the Tulsa County bench 11 years, with a well-known low tolerance for anybody wasting her morning. She reviewed the file, looked up and said, "This is a hearing on a fraud complaint and emergency petition to void a power of attorney in the matter of Walter Adkins. Counsel, identify yourselves for the record." Bruce Talley identified himself for Dale Ferris. Denise identified herself for me. Judge Nolan looked at Denise a moment and said, "I want to confirm the record shows Mr. Adkins is present and consents to today's proceeding." I said, "I'm present, Your Honor, and I asked personally that this date be held." The judge looked at me with an expression carefully, flat on the surface, though I thought underneath it there was something close to interest. She said, "Mr. Talley, you may proceed." Bruce Talley stood and laid out the position in the practiced language of a man who'd done this kind of thing plenty of times, that the power of attorney was validly executed, that his client had acted with the family's best interest at heart, given Mr. Adkins's age and circumstances living alone. Judge Nolan looked past him to where Harold sat in the gallery. She said, "Is Harold Bennick present?" Harold stood. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "Mr. Bennick, is the CPA verification letter attached to this loan application yours?" Harold said, "It is not, Your Honor. I never prepared or reviewed any such letter. I never verified any financial statements for this loan. I reported this fraudulent use of my credentials to the Oklahoma Accountancy Board on the day I learned of it, and I have my complete file on Mr. Adkins here, which contains no such correspondence of any kind." The room went still, the specific way a room goes still, when something real just landed in it. Not theatrical, just everybody quietly recalculating at once. Bruce Talley stood very straight at the table. I watched Dale's face in the moment right after Harold spoke. 36 years of watching systems fail teaches you to recognize the exact instant a plan meets the real world and doesn't survive contact. I'd seen that look on foremen's faces standing over a derailed car, the look of a man understanding, in real time, that the structure underneath him just went out. Judge Nolan said, "Mr. Talley, I want to be precise. The financial documentation underlying this loan has been directly disavowed by the accountant whose credentials are on it, and he's reported it to the state licensing board. Do you have a response?" Bruce Talley said, and his voice had lost the confidence it started the morning with. "Your Honor, I was not made aware of any issue with this documentation." The judge turned to Dale. "Mr. Ferris, are you the individual who submitted this loan application under the power of attorney in question?" Dale stood. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "Are you aware that submitting fraudulent financial and notarized legal documents to a lending institution and this court is a criminal offense under Oklahoma law?" A silence. Then Dale said, "Your Honor, I can explain the circumstances," she said. "I expect you'll have the opportunity." She looked back at Bruce Talley. "I am voiding the power of attorney as fraudulently executed, effective immediately. I am ordering the loan application permanently withdrawn. I am referring the forged documentation, the false notarization, and the fraudulent CPA letter to the district attorney's office for review. Mr. Adkins, I want the record to reflect that no finding of incapacity of any kind has been made or was ever properly supported in this matter." She looked once more at Dale. "Mr. Ferris, I'd strongly suggest you speak with your attorney about what comes next. We're adjourned." She stood and left, and the room came back to life around the wreckage of what had just happened in it. "Everything?" Denise touched my arm and said quietly, "That's exactly how that needed to go." Mark stood beside me and didn't say anything, just put his hand on my shoulder, which was exactly the right thing to do. I looked across the room, at Dale's table. Bruce Talley was leaning toward him, talking low and fast. Dale sat very still, the good suit and the good haircut still technically in place and meaning nothing at all now. He wasn't the man who'd walked in that morning. That man had a plan and 2 years of scaffolding under it. This man didn't have any of that left. He looked up once, not really at me, just the reflexive way people look around when they're trying to put a world back together that just came apart. Our eyes caught for a second. I didn't look away, and I didn't say anything. I just looked back at him with the calm of a man who'd run this outcome in his head 2 weeks earlier and found the numbers sitting exactly where he expected them to land. Then I picked up my jacket and walked out of that courthouse into a cold, bright Tulsa morning with my son next to me and my attorney behind me and the folder that started all of it under Denise's arm as evidence in something that was only just getting started. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation inside 2 weeks. Dale was charged in the spring with forgery, fraud on a financial institution, false notarization, and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which under Oklahoma statute doesn't require the victim to actually be vulnerable, only for the defendant to have represented him as such, and I understand that distinction mattered a great deal in how the charges were written. The bank suspended him within the week, and he was let go before the month was out. I didn't track every detail after that because I didn't need to. Carrie filed for divorce that summer. She brought her phone records to Denise's office and told the truth on every single question anybody asked her. She is still my daughter. The line between being deceived and choosing not to look too hard is one I decided to draw in her favor, and I don't regret it. She and Tyler live about 15 minutes from me now. She comes by for dinner most Sundays. She asks a lot more questions than she used to. Mark flew back down for the first Sunday dinner after everything settled, and the three of us sat at my kitchen table without the weight the last 2 years had put over every conversation. Carrie said, "Dad, Mom knew about him, didn't she?" I said, "Your mother knew things a long time before most people finish thinking them." She said, I, what exactly did she know?" I said, "She knew he was always running numbers on people. She just knew which numbers." Carrie looked at her plate a while, then said, "I should have asked her more when I still could have." I told her, "Ask them now." She left plenty of answers behind if you know where to look. Rosemary's notebook is still in the kitchen drawer. I haven't moved it. Curtis still meets me at the door every evening, at the same time, expecting the same walk, same as he has, for 8 years. The house on Birch Lane is held in the Adkins family trust now, Mark as trustee, everything documented down to the last account number, filed the way. I've filed everything, my whole working life. I am 67 years old. I walk 2.5 miles most mornings with an old dog who has never once let me down. I keep a calendar of my own life the way other men keep a diary, and I could hand any auditor in this country a full accounting of the last 5 years inside 20 minutes. I am, in every way that counts, a fully capable man managing his own life on his own terms. The documents that claimed otherwise now sit in a criminal case file as evidence of exactly what they were. My own father used to say a man's worth is measured by what he builds and what he's willing to stand in front of to protect it. He worked the rail yards himself, 30 years, and he never once let a piece of track go unchecked because he figured it was probably fine. I learned that the same way I learned most things that mattered, by watching him do it and never being told outright. I built a life. Somebody decided it was theirs for the taking. I stopped him with 36 years of writing things down, one very good attorney, and an accountant who picked up the phone himself instead of letting it wait for an appointment. That's the only inheritance that was ever going to matter. Claude responded, "The truth is, love doesn't always look like trust. Sometimes it looks like a notebook in a kitchen drawer, a calendar kept for decades, a habit of writing thing. The truth is, love doesn't always look like trust. Sometimes it looks like a notebook in a kitchen drawer, a calendar kept for decades, a habit of writing things down just in case." Walter didn't win because he was angry. He won because he'd spent a lifetime paying attention and keeping record of what mattered. So call the people you love. Ask more questions. Write things down. It might just save something precious one day. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine, positive life lesson with you.